This is the third and final part of our series on the Big Red Machine's Great Eight. If you've made it this far, well, it's safe to say that you may be a hardcore Big Red Machine fan like I am. I put this video together just because I thought it might be fun. And when I found this footage from the 75 World Series, I just had to put it in somewhere. I almost titled this video Extra Innings because it's just a little something extra. But at the heart of this video, what I really wanted to put together was a gallery of all the Sports Illustrated covers that the Great Eight appeared on. See, before the internet and cable and ESPN, everyone relied on magazines like Sports Illustrated and the Sporting News to get their weekly dose of sports information. For years, I was a faithful subscriber to Sports Illustrated, and I couldn't wait to get the next issue just to see who was on the cover. In total, I was able to find 26 Sports Illustrated covers that featured members from the Great Eight. You can go to sicovers.com and apparently pull up any cover in Sports Illustrated's history. I couldn't find any covers with Geronimo, Concepcion, or Griffey, but I did find 11 with Ken Griffey Jr., and I guess that counts for something. Well, I hope you enjoy the walk down memory lane like I did. Here we go. Joe Morgan appeared on 3 covers, and of course this predates his time with the Big Red Machine. Morgan was a 10-time All-Star, but 66 would be his first. This is the first of Bench's 6 covers. This title says The Best Rookies of 1968, and of course Bench won Rookie of the Year in 68. He played 154 games and drove in 82 runs. This is a great cover that says the Reds brash Pete Rose. In total, I found 16 covers with Pete Rose, and here's one with the great Ernie Banks. In Bench's first 5 covers, he appears in catching gear each time. This came out in July of 1970. By the end of June, Bench had 25 home runs. He finished with 45, and he took the MVP award. You gotta love this cover with Rose in the background. It just says it all. Here's a great picture of Bench in 1972, and of course, he was MVP that year. Here's Rose in 1974. It's not exactly the most exciting cover, but he was MVP in 73, and I'm sure that's why he was featured. The 1975 World Series was so epic that SI featured it on 2 different covers. Here's reliever Will McEnany jumping into Bench's arms. This is a special year-end double issue where Sports Illustrated named Rose Sportsman of the Year. Morgan won the MVP in 75, and this special baseball issue in April of 76 tags Morgan as the complete player. This is the first of Foster's 2 covers. While Morgan won the MVP again in 76, Foster was the runner-up. This is probably my favorite cover, as the Reds swept the Yankees in 4 games. Bench was named MVP of the World Series, hitting .533 with 2 home runs and 6 RBIs. This is a great cover with Foster and Hall of Famer Rod Carew. This is fresh off of Foster's 77 MVP campaign, where he smashed 52 home runs. This captures Pete Rose's 44-game hitting streak. It's pretty interesting that the streak was stopped on August 1st, because this cover is dated August 7. I always like this cover. Rose's pants are filthy just like they should be. He's just got the wrong uniform on. And here's 2 of those guys that met in the 1975 World Series. Rose's Phillies won the World Series in 1980, and with Perez and Morgan joining the party in 1983, they would make it back, but ultimately they fell to the Baltimore Orioles. This is an interesting cover, because after the Phillies went to the World Series in '83, Rose, Perez, and Morgan all left the Phillies. The 40-year-old Morgan went to the Oakland A's and played 1 final season before retiring. Perez was 42 years old, and he returned to the Reds to play 3 more seasons. And Rose was 43 years old, and he went to Montreal. But during mid-season, he was traded back to the Reds and joined Perez. This is a great picture. Of course, Rose is going to break this record 2 weeks later on September 8th. And here's the final 5 covers, and they all feature Rose, but of course, for the wrong reasons. But it's part of the history, so here they are. These 5 covers kind of ruin the fun, but there's no way I'm going to end this video on this note. In spite of already making 2 videos about the Great Eight, there were still some pictures and some random facts that I really wasn't able to get into those videos. That's why I created this gallery at the end of our last video. Bench still holds the slams record for a catcher. I don't know what this picture's from, but considering how Bench just killed Carlton, this is a really cool picture. We can see why Bench's teammates sometimes called him Hands. This photo's probably from the 72 World Series, but I guess it could be from an All-Star game. Perez was the MVP of the 67 All-Star game, and this is a great picture of him receiving the award. He hit a solo shot off a catfish hunter in the 15th inning to win the game. These next two facts about Perez are really cool. They show that even into his 40s, he was still clutch. After the Reds won the World Series in '76, they decided to trade the 34-year-old Perez. They had a young 24-year-old in Dan Dreesen, who they thought was their future at first base. As it turns out, Perez drove in more runs over the next 4 years than Dreesen did, and this turned out to be a colossal mistake, as Perez was the glue that held this team together. The Big Red Machine would never recover. Morgan was an on-base machine. In fact, he's 5th all-time in walks. The problem for opposing pitchers is when they put him on base, he loved to run. He had 689 career stolen bases. That's 11th all-time. With the score tied 3-3 in Game 7 of the '75 World Series, Morgan hit a single to center field and scored Griffey, which turned out to be the winning run. Here's Morgan receiving one of his 2 MVP awards. Here's a fun one. On Morgan's 40th birthday, he had 4 hits, 2 home runs, and a double. Moving on to Rose, the Sporting News named him Player of the Decade in the 1970s. And I love this next cover from a book. It's just titled Pete Rose on Hitting. While being the all-time hit king and holding a 44-game hitting streak are obviously impressive, I think the next 2 facts are pretty impressive as well. I mean, starting the All-Star game at 5 different positions and playing 500 games at 5 different positions. Those are feats that may never be repeated. And I threw this in for fun. Some players disappear in the spotlight. Rose wasn't one of those guys. As we round out the infield, it's pretty interesting to learn that Concepcion was actually drafted as a pitcher. I like this picture because you can see that's Rose sliding by him. Concepcion won 4 consecutive Gold Gloves and totally won 5, and there's only 4 shortstops who have won more. When we think of Concepcion, we think of his defense, but he consistently stole bases and totaled over 300 for his career. The '82 All-Star Game was played in Montreal, and Davey Concepcion hit a 2-run homer off of Dennis Eckersley. He was named the game's MVP. Some people think the number 13 is bad luck, and so few players choose to wear it. That probably explains this odd fact. Foster's 52 home runs in 1977 was quite an accomplishment. He's the only player in the 70s or 80s to reach the 50 home run mark. This is a great baseball card, and with Chris Chambliss playing first base, this must be a picture from the 1976 World Series. This title is spot on, as Foster was the MVP in '77, but it was also the beginning of the end for the Big Red Machine. Here's 2 great sluggers. Kingman hit 442 home runs in his career, and in 1979, he popped a league-leading 48. Foster missed 18 games in '76, but he still led the league with 121 RBIs and came in second in the MVP voting. For his work, the Sporting News named him Player of the Year. I love this picture of Geronimo and Morgan. They had to give up Lee May to get these guys in a trade, but it turned out to be a good one. Geronimo will forever be known for his great defense, but it's worth noting he was a .300 hitter in both the '75 and '76 World Series. This bobblehead sure reminds me of the final out of the '75 World Series. And speaking of the final out, here's Geronimo celebrating. Now here's a cool piece of trivia. Geronimo was a 3,000 strikeout victim of both Bob Gibson and Nolan Ryan. Geronimo's response was, "I was just in the right place at the right time." With Concepcion and Foster being borderline Hall of Famers, it's probably fair to say that Griffey's only the 7th best player in this lineup, and yet he played 19 seasons and was a lifetime .296 hitter. Griffey was a 4-sport athlete in high school. One time in basketball, he dropped 40 points and pulled down 27 rebounds. Okay, there's some crazy great genes in this Griffey family. His dad was an all-star who played with Stan the Man, and of course, we know about his son Junior. Speaking of Junior, they were the first father-son duo to play on a Major League Baseball team. And when you're great, you do great things. Of course, they went back-to-back. Junior hit 630 for his career. And I thought this was rather interesting. If you want to have the greatest lineup of all time, you need to have some international flavor. Perez was from Cuba, Concepcion from Venezuela, and Geronimo from the Dominican Republic. In 1970, the Reds had part of their nucleus and benched Perez, Rose, and Concepcion, but they fell in the World Series to the Baltimore Orioles. The Reds stumbled in '71, finishing 4th in the NL West. The only silver lining was that they acquired George Foster in a trade from the San Francisco Giants. In '72, the Reds acquired Morgan and Geronimo, and Morgan had a breakout year. He led the league in runs, walks, on-base percentage, and WAR with a 9.3. They got back to the World Series, but they lost to the A's 4-3. In 1973, Ken Griffey arrived on the scene, and now the Great Eight were intact. Griffey didn't play a full season until 1975, when he hit .305 with an on-base percentage of .391, and powered by Joe Morgan's MVP seasons of '75 and '76. the Reds became world champions. After their back-to-back championships, the Reds decided to trade future Hall of Famer Tony Perez, breaking up the Great Eight and ultimately sending a signal that the Big Red Machine was in trouble. In 1979, Rose became a free agent, and he ultimately bolted for the Phillies for a 4-year, $3.24 million contract that made him the highest paid player in baseball. The very next year, the Phillies won the World Series. Well, that's it. I hope you've enjoyed watching this 3-part series on the Great Eight. Truly the greatest lineup in the history of baseball.